And the title of this one is Faster Rail Opportunities and Considerations, including linking the West to Canberra and regional New South Wales. So if our panellists would like to start wandering their way up to the stage as I do this introduction. High-speed rail obviously is one of those things that's on and off the agenda, the media agenda, the political agenda, but panels like this and the people who are on it are pretty critical to making sure that it stays on the agenda and that we actually build more momentum. So if you could please welcome our panel. We have Andrew Barr, MLA, the ACT Chief Minister, Amy Brown, Deputy Secretary, Strategy and Delivery from the New South Wales Department of Premier and Cabinet, Lindy Deitz is the CEO of Campbelltown City Council, Malcolm Southwell, Acting CEO of the National Faster Rail Agency, and please welcome also our moderator, Faith Halliday, Special Advisor at the Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue.
Hi Lindy, how are you? Sorry.
Okay, good morning. So if I could just take a second to firstly say that I am absolutely delighted to be moderating today's panel on Faster Rail. Line-up of superstars that I can't wait to throw some questions to. But before I do, I just wanted to really quickly acknowledge a couple of things. Some of you may recognise me from the East London study tour that the Dialogue recently undertook. I was one of the official flag bearers. Today is obviously a significant step up from that role, to which it is actually my first time moderating a panel in front of a room this big. So thank you to my panellists. And secondly, all of your compliments can be directed to Christopher Brown in the break. So let's throw to our panel. I think it's probably prudent for everyone if I start with Malcolm Southwell, Acting Chief Executive of the National Faster Rail Agency, to overview the project. So Malcolm, we've been talking about this for some time now. What is Faster Rail? What are the potential links? Where are we at in the process?
Thank you, Faith, and thanks, Chris, as well, for the opportunity to participate today. I think BOOMTOWN is always a great opportunity for Western Sydney, a region that we know is growing quite rapidly. In terms of our role as a National Faster Rail Agency, we have a role in supporting the Australian Government in terms of its planning for Australia's future population. And I hope I can give you a bit of a sense today, sort of the national perspective on that, and to complement sort of my state and local government colleagues on the panel. What we're about is supporting economic growth and social opportunity to provide those rail connections between capital cities and growing regional centres. As we've heard, Australia is heavily an urbanised nation, and we've got now around 64% of Australians living in capital cities. And that brings challenges, and we've heard some of the previous speakers talk about that and the congestion that the people are experiencing. But we believe with proper planning and investment, there still remain some significant opportunities to be realised. The Australian Government has a 20-year faster rail plan that we think will help make the most of those opportunities before us, and our role as an agency is to oversee the development and implementation of that plan. I think behind you can see some of the work that we're doing, and we're working with Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales at the present around some faster rail business opportunities, faster rail business case opportunities in those states. And our immediate priorities are completing the three current business cases, being Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast, Melbourne to Shepparton, and here in New South Wales, of course, Sydney to Newcastle. And we're also working with Victoria around Melbourne to Geelong. And we are also working with New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria for the next tranche of 5 business cases, being Brisbane to the Gold Coast, Melbourne to Albury, Melbourne to Traralgon, Sydney to Parkes and Sydney to Wollongong. And of course, we'll be looking at other corridors over time as well. And I'm very much looking forward to the work that the New South Wales Government is undertaking to develop a faster rail plan for this state. And including that is the work with the ACT Government on the Sydney to Canberra route, which no doubt will be topical today. And as Minister Tudge has previously noted, that corridor is on our 20-year faster rail plan. So collectively, all of that work will help inform the evidence base for us, along with advice from an expert panel that we expect to be announced shortly. And that will inform our advice to the Australian Government on an investment strategy to deliver an investment plan for the next 20 years and complement the work that our state and territory and local government colleagues are undertaking on faster rail.
Thank you, Malcolm. Okay, Chief Minister, in terms of population density and existing customer base, the northern corridor between Sydney and Newcastle has some clear advantages. But what would set Sydney or a Western Sydney link to Canberra apart from some of the other options?
I think capacity for Canberra to grow significantly, and the Southern Highlands region, obviously between Canberra and Western Sydney, also has great potential for growth. Canberra's economy is now greater than the state of Tasmania's. It's the sixth largest economy in Australia. Our population's been growing faster than the Australian average. Canberra and Queanbeyan is now 500,000 people, and we have a situation now where we have more job vacancies in Canberra than we have unemployed people. So our city is going to be a net importer of labour in the coming decade. And all of this jobs growth is coming outside of the Commonwealth public sector, which has in fact shrunk by 20,000 people over the last 8 years. So Canberra's economy is rapidly diversifying. The fact that the OECD ranked us the world's most livable city, and we're a 10 to 15 minute city, not a 30-minute city, I think will all lead to there being greater interest in Canberra as both a location for people to live and work, but also obviously as the home of the Australian government will continue to be a very significant business destination. Our objective is to make Canberra cheaper, faster and easier to get to, and the Sydney-Canberra rail corridor is an important part of that. But to set, I guess, a perspective on this, my journey this morning began with leaving home at 6:15, being at Canberra Airport at about 6:25 to catch a flight that was actually on time, which is a rarity at the moment, to be here in this building by 9 a.m. So that's what we've got to beat, about 3 hours door to door. That's the challenge. And at the moment, the Canberra-Sydney rail service is about 4 hours. You can drive it in 3, provided you don't get caught in traffic in Western Sydney. That's what we've got to beat.
So a faster rail link would surely see that time in the first instance reduced to 3 hours. To set a little bit of the context around faster rail, there are currently 4 proposed routes being explored in New South Wales. One of those is the Southern Coastal Corridor, which is what the Chief Minister was just speaking to. Before I throw to Lindy, we might play a video prepared by Campbelltown, which is also on the Southern Inland Corridor, and then we'll follow up with a question. So Lindy, Campbelltown is very well placed between Sydney and Canberra, or Western Sydney and Canberra if you like, on the Southern Inland Corridor. Do you really think it's possible that one day the region could be a commuter hub for locals and who can be able to work in both Sydney and in Canberra? And what would come with the opportunity of this corridor?
So the answer to the first part of your question is absolutely yes. Campbelltown is already part of the Southern Inland Corridor currently. As the Chief Minister said, I think from Campbelltown, from Canberra to Sydney, or Canberra to Campbelltown is 9 stops currently, and yes, 4 hours. So for us, the infrastructure is there. It's currently constrained with freight. Given the population growth that is going to occur alone for the MacArthur, we will be reaching up to 800,000 people. We have the land holdings. We already have the stabling yards. We think that we're a very logical first stage, and as our video demonstrates, the most affordable at this stage. It gives us that gateway not only to Sydney, but also as an interchange to get to the new Western Sydney airport. So from our perspective, the economic uplift, the opportunity to get more connectivity for regional New South Wales to employment options and major infrastructure, we just think it's a no-brainer.
Okay, Amy. The New South Wales Government has appointed global expert Professor Andrew McNaughton to provide some advice around the delivery of a faster rail opportunity.
Yep.
The McNaughton report is expected imminently. What might we expect in this report, and what sets this study apart from other studies done in the past?
Great question. Thank you, Faith. So the New South Wales Fast Rail Strategy, which I'm kind of looking after, we're 100 metres from the finish line. So all the economic modelling's been done, the analysis has been done, we know what we want to say, and it's kind of ready to go. When it's publicly released is a matter for government. I would hope that it would be Q1 2020. But for me personally, the strategy's not so much about trains. It happens to involve some trains, but trains isn't exactly the focus. For me, it's about three things: people, place, and economic benefit. So focusing on people for a second, we'll start with the question of what does connectivity to our regions mean for people in our regions. So when we started off doing some kind of community consultation in regional towns and centres, we asked questions like, what does your future look like? What do you want it to look like? What would it take for your kids to want to stay here and grow up here and start their own families? And what does that connectivity do for quality of life? And for me, quality of life is a lot around choice. So choice as to where people work, because suddenly they're connected to a lot more of New South Wales, which means they can have more choice over the jobs that they do. And interestingly, some of the towns that did the best in terms of our economic modelling were ones where you could commute in both directions to access jobs, which is very interesting, kind of logical, but also interesting. But also choice, because businesses are more likely to locate within your own region. So you've got that kind of extra ability to choose there. It's also about place. Yes, of course, rejuvenation of places where fast rail goes to, but also place in terms of where the destinations as gateways, so gateways to within the region themselves. And some of that community consultation, people were saying, a fast train to Sydney? Yes. Sometimes I just want to get around my own region better. So what do we do in terms of that connectivity from the destination to the region that sits beyond? And then the third bit is the economic benefit story, which is really a jobs story. So if New South Wales productivity is increased overall by virtue of fast rail, including making it even more attractive relative to other states, we all benefit. There's also the jobs in terms of, like I said, people being better matched to their jobs because they have greater choice around what jobs they do. Plus businesses being able to make the most of being able to locate in regional areas due to better land prices and so on, but still being able to make those fast business connections. So when you wind all of that in with travel time savings and people being able to spend more time with their kids than sitting in a car, and benefits such as tourism, the economic benefit story is pretty strong. So it's very exciting.
I might just add to that, I absolutely agree with that from what we've heard from some of our early stakeholder engagement. It's for people, it's about how do we make the regions work so that they have that choice. It's not just about speed, it's about reliability and capacity. And we're certainly seeing that in other projects and other places. For example, Geelong had an emergence of a strong employment centre as a consequence of some provision of efficient rail services, and it's sort of 80 to 100 k's from Melbourne and around 250,000 people. So very much.
That's a good point. I think our audience is getting super pumped, or they just feel sorry for me that it's my first panel, but we've received a lot of questions. So I might read out a few and feel free to jump in. So faster rail is a cheap and achievable option, but is Australia aiming too low? Why can't we have a China or Japan-style bullet train? Chief Minister, you look like
start
you're
on that one.
busting.
Look, I just don't want to make the good the enemy of the perfect. I've been hearing about bullet trains and high-speed rail since I was in primary school. Every time even just my attendance at this event, the level of cynicism within the community about, not another high-speed rail forum, not another, there must be an election coming. It's palpable, the level of cynicism in the community in relations. We just have to get on and deliver something soon. And I don't want to make the good the enemy of the perfect. And this is tangible and real. And I think the thing that is going to make a difference here is that the level of government that actually does things, state and territory governments, are involved in collaborating on this project. With the greatest of respect to the federal government, it's not really their core business most of the time, and have a bit of a huge level of frustration and cynicism around the politics behind the choice of some of the corridors in the first phase of the federal government's faster rail program, but that is what it is. So delighted to be able to work with the New South Wales government on a project that is real, and delighted that they've already committed funding to improve some of the worst parts in the Southern Highlands of the existing Canberra-Sydney rail corridor. New trains, fixing that problem, some pragmatic decisions around signalling, level crossing removals and the like for several hundreds of millions of dollars rather than billions. We can get that journey time down to 3 hours, and then it is competitive with driving, with bus and with flying.
That's one reason why I was excited about what Malcolm said around, it being about growing the regions, because that's a great story, and for me, it's much less around high-speed bullet trains between capital cities on the eastern seaboard, in an attempt to compete with air travel. When you look at the kind of cost of something like that compared to the economic benefit, like Chief Minister said, it starts to not stack up, and then suddenly we end up doing nothing. So actually connecting to the regions, and also looking at, and this is where community, what are the tipping points for people? What's a business interaction, an hour? What's a social interaction, 2 hours? What's visiting your granny you only see every once a year, 3 hours? It's those sort of questions that actually determine things like speed. It's actually more about time and human behaviour. And when you start to ask those questions, the high-speed bullet train from, big capital cities to the other becomes a bit, particularly where it's more around, cities in the desert, it starts to become a bit less compelling.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. And that's actually a great lead into the next question, which perhaps, Lindy, you can respond to. It's a simple one, but I think it's important. Why does faster rail make a difference to people's lives, and what are we trying to achieve? So from Campbelltown's perspective, how would you respond?
I think rail is incredibly important to our community's lives. We have some fun facts for the Campbelltown LGA. 67% of people that park at our commuter car parks are outside of our LGA, and a large proportion of those people are coming from the Wingecarribee and Wollondilly. We're seeing our residents, and the statistic is higher than 60%, having to travel 2 to 3 hours for employment. So having an ability to connect people more efficiently actually gives them, as the Chief Minister said, time back in their lives to spend with their families. We are seeing a lot of stress on families in the Western Parkland City, a lot of not so great statistics in terms of domestic violence, housing stress. And I think that anything we can do to improve the quality of life of families by giving them that accessibility to efficient public transport, the more meaningful the actual implementation is on the ground.
Yeah, but that's kind of tricky, because if we start to talk about some of the community benefits, surely that would go across all 4 corridors that are currently being looked at by M'Naghten. So, Amy, is there a criteria, or how are we going to prioritise these 4 options? And how do we weigh it up? What are the driving factors around the selection? Can they all be done at the same time? Will there be an order?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that one is not necessarily exclusive to the others. So we've committed funding towards, getting started, and there are things that you can do along all 4 routes that will improve people's lives. Because, like I said, time not in the car or not on a slow train is time with their kids, right? So it is at that point where everything makes a difference. But at the same time, there are certain routes where the economic benefit is simply greater. And that's because if we think of New South Wales having some global gateways, I count Canberra in this as well. So, Canberra, Sydney, Newcastle, you can see why greater connectivity to global gateways and employment hubs, those places and places that sit between them, is going to have good economic benefit, and the story starts to really kind of tell itself.
Okay, we are taking questions from the floor too, so please do not be afraid to stick your hand up and help a sister out. But I think that, Malcolm, if I can just ask you a question about potential funding. When you are looking from a national perspective at faster rail, and the national government may or may not be considering funding those, what are your criteria for selection?
We're very much looking to put together an evidence base for these corridors, and that's why we're working with other partners around the business cases, because that's an important part of putting together the sort of what the national picture will look like. Clearly, funding these rail corridors will be an expensive piece of work, and so how we deliver that and the benefits for community is going to be quite important. So what are the benefits to commuters? How do we use these rail corridors to grow regions, provide people with choices we've talked about, to be able to either work in a region and live in a city, or live in a city and work in a region, and how do people get access for health, leisure, travel, and etc. So we're very much interested in doing that strategic planning, so we have a plan for what the priorities for investment are. And obviously, in terms of funding and financing, there's only really 2 sources of funds. It's taxpayers' funds or bringing in some private sector capital. And so we need to carefully choose those projects that are going to provide the benefit, the best bang for buck fundamentally, and provide the economic and social benefits.
Okay, so while we're talking funding, I might jump to the Chief Minister. The ACT would stand to gain a lot from an improved rail connectivity, but you only have jurisdiction over a very small part of
about 9 kilometres, I believe. Yeah.
Inland corridor. So let's talk some cash. What kind of funding would you and your government be willing to contribute to a project like this?
Well, we've already put forward funding and obviously working with the New South Wales government on a number of elements of the project. We'd be somewhat limited in terms of how much money we could spend in the state of New South Wales. We don't actually even own Canberra Railway Station. New South Wales government owns that, and it isn't in the ideal position. It's not in the city centre of Canberra. I think a significant contribution we can make is to extend our light rail network to the existing station in Kingston, and that would obviously, a faster Canberra-Sydney rail service would be the trigger to be able to justify making that investment internally within the territory. Arguably, there's a potential partnership around the rolling stock itself. I think part of the business case would also be focused on a business traveller, and so what's the premium product? What would be the opportunity there? Because a big part of our travel market is people coming to Capitol Hill to lobby the feds. It's a big part of our business. They're probably not going to do that sitting in economy class on a train, but if there is a more premium product, then I think that's a really significant potential. So we'd certainly look at that opportunity in the future as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question from the floor. Is it going to get hard for Faster Rail to compete with autonomous vehicle trips on the existing national highway network? Maybe we can throw to Lindy for you on this, if we're specifically talking, or maybe not. Would anyone else
that's
like
fine. Look, I think for us, the M31 and the M5 are already considerably congested. It's more logical. The strategic analysis that we had undertaken was very much evidence-based, and it really supported the economic benefit of the Southern Inland Corridor. Now, for us, our role is to try and get people off the roads, and we're wanting to create those accessibilities to key services that people are looking for. So government's already investing heavily in the Macarthur region. They're currently doing stage 2 of Campbelltown Hospital, $632 million. It's going to be the third paediatric hospital outside of Sydney. We've got a regional arts centre. Can't miss the opportunity to say that we're going to have one of the nation's newest football teams, Macarthur FC. When we're adjacent to the Australian Botanic Gardens. So for all the reasons that Amy said, there are so many livability components that faster rail can achieve, whereas if you're on the road, you'll just bypass. So I think there is that we've got to leverage off the existing government investment that is being put into place.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And part of it is what my Transport Minister, Minister Constance, said, there are different transport solutions for different scenarios. And when you look at some of our behavioural insights that we did, if we get this right and we can kind of get the right transport solution and the right place solution, people would, commute as far as Newcastle to get to Canberra for work. Because if we can do it in the right way, I don't think people would do that in an autonomous vehicle. So to me, they're very different transport solutions that have very different outcomes, both in terms of the individual people in their families, but then at the places that they kind of touch.
Malcolm?
I was just going to say that, to add to that, no one mode can cover all of our transport needs. So rail does provide important capacity, and I think it needs a comprehensive approach, and autonomous vehicles can certainly help as well with that first and last mile, which is a very important part of the transport connection.
Okay, and perhaps a final question from our audience, unless I can see any hands up. Oh, we have hands. Okay, Lakshmi.
Hi there, Michael Jalon, City of Parramatta. The maps that depict the routes for the New South Wales Faster Rail, but the National as well, they all tend to converge in very nondescript blobs in Sydney. Future Transport 2056 actually makes reference to converging in Parramatta,
Yeah.
which is of course of interest, but my question's not that, although I throw it out. But when do we get to talk about where this all touches Sydney, and particularly Western Sydney?
Yeah, great. I can jump in on the convergence stuff. So just to spruik Campbelltown for a second. Campbelltown is it's a great place anyway, but it is also a great kind of connector of metropolitan with non-metropolitan. And if you're thinking about a fast rail from kind of Canberra to Sydney and then potentially heading north, there's a lot of logic to hubbing through Campbelltown. And there's also a really beautiful synergy between Campbelltown and the Illawarra. So people in the Illawarra commute to Western Sydney for work, but people in Western Sydney go to the Illawarra for recreation. So there's a lot of reasons why Western Sydney is absolutely fantastic. Secondly, businesses in Western Sydney will obviously grow because they have greater access to talent, who's going to be sort of coming their way. And then the third point I'd say is when you do connect in, you've got to think about where you're plugging into multimodal connectivity-wise. So if we can plug into a place that has train, bus, light rail, metro, active transport, whatever else, then of course that's going to be very logical, particularly because you can get to that place and then beyond that place.
Thank you, Amy. I think we've got one more question from the floor.
My name is Peter Kerr. I live at Mount Druitt. I'm very interested in public transport. I'd like to see a fast train from Canberra to Sydney, then up to Newcastle. When it gets to Campbelltown, it'd have to go through a tunnel. Then would they have a station at Parramatta or then, or the city or, thanks.
Sort of reiterating what I just said a little bit, but I think the specifics of exactly... we'd be silly not to consider all options in terms of where fast rail should come into if we're talking about the kind of Greater Sydney region. So places like Parramatta have great multimodal connectivity. That we were just looking at the video that said 1.5 million people will be living in the Western Parkland city, so we can't forget that. But then we have this amazing metro as well. So if we can plug into the metro, then you should be able to get to other parts of Greater Sydney quickly, particularly the Sydney CBD. So nothing's off the table because this is a high-level strategy with then kind of more detailed business cases to flow from it. But yes, we're absolutely thinking of the citizens of Western Sydney. So thank you, sir, for raising it as one of on behalf of your citizens in your area.
Just observe from our perspective, the sort of destinations within Sydney that Canberrans would seek to travel to will vary greatly depending, on reason of travel. So the capacity to effectively disperse within Sydney and Western Sydney from a central point is important too. So whilst there's obviously a lot of business travel that will want to get into the CBD, there are a lot of other reasons for travel for Canberrans, from people in Queanbeyan, Goulburn, all of the places along the way who would want to go to a wide variety of destinations within Sydney. So that, I think, is a really important strength of developing the corridor and the multimodal talk that Amy has just outlined.
Thank you. I think we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just invite a closing remark from each of our panellists, perhaps starting with you, Malcolm.
Look, thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity. I think faster rail for us is an opportunity, if we get it right, to make a real difference to people's lives. But we do need a good evidence base around it. We are needing to make sure that we invest in the right corridors, and we need to think about both ends of the rail line as well. Fundamentally, how do we provide the opportunities to maximise regional benefits, jobs and sustainable economic growth? And of course, how we provide that opportunity to help address the population challenges.
Thank you. Lindy?
Look, I think, excuse me, we've been talking about fast rail for a very long time. And I think, excuse me, sorry. I think it's really exciting that it's finally building momentum. I think it's very timely in terms of the rapid growth that is occurring, and we really welcome, the government's progress with this issue. For us, it's very meaningful in terms of the opportunities that are at hand with the absolute growth of the Western Parkland City and the need to generate local employment opportunities and economic uplift. So from our perspective, we're very excited about the future announcements of government. Thank you.
Thank you. It is really an exciting time. Amy?
Yeah, just to thank my fellow panellists, one thing that's been really encouraging for me as part of this conversation is it hasn't been so much about trains, sort of finishing where I started. It's about people and quality of life and choice and jobs and economic benefit and what's for the good of the state and the country. The focus on our regions is so important. Western Sydney benefits massively when we do that. Just the whole of state and then, onto benefits for Australia more generally has been really encouraging to me.
Thank you. And Chief Minister?
Thanks, Faith. I think my clear message is, again, that we should not make the good the enemy of the perfect. We do need to get on with this, and we need to demonstrate quickly that decades of planning and studies and feasibility and business case development and all the rest needs to start to move into actually doing something and doing it soon. That's what I'm focused on. And I know that's what the New South Wales government are focused on, and so I hope jointly we can deliver something soon.
Thank you. It is absolutely an exciting time for the country, for our state, and of course for Western Sydney. So again, please join me in thanking our panellists for your time.
Thank you.